Hi, welcome to Kincardine United Church's Fireside Chat. This is the digital space where I reflect on current events from a faith perspective, mixing in some humor, some song, and some prayer. Thanks to the well-practiced skills of Judy Zarubik on the other side of your screen, this Fireside Chat is recorded while she makes the tech flow smoothly. Once recorded, Terry Boyd uploads it to our YouTube channel where you found us. Thank you both. I couldn't do this without either of you. Now, I know that the sap is running well in maple trees, and I wonder what the trees think about when donating. Sadly, with these warm temperatures, although it's a little cooler now, there hasn't been any ice fishing this winter. However, here's a tip for next winter. I laughed as I showed this to the clerk at the grocery store, but he didn't understand why I was laughing. I guess my sense of humor is a little odd since others don't find the same things funny that I do. Whining just doesn't work, you see. It's like this orchestra instrument. Here's a picture that demonstrated a sour response. You see, these posts were removed because someone took offense. With the growing push toward EVs, I wonder. I know these puns are making me sheepish because I love them so much. For those of you who can read music, here is a hint for better computer passwords. Finally, here is a little known fact. Before the crowbar was invented, crows simply drank at home. That terrible pun was presented to you by a murder of crows. Something else which has been murdered too often over 2 millennia is Christian theology. Here's an advertisement for a Lenten series, a sermon series outside a Christian church in Chicago this year. I would love to give up bad theology for Lent. There have been and continue to be too many ways that we in the Christian church have twisted the life and ministry of Jesus into something it never was. I want to share this video featuring two remarkable dancers to the song What About Us by Pink. Notice that the dancers are not perfect in physique nor in mobility, yet they represent the billions of beautiful hearts around the world, people who have been sold on warped understandings of God's purpose for us. Of course, they would wonder, what about us?
We are searchlights we can see in the dark. We are rockets pointed up at the stars. We are billions of beautiful hearts, and you sold us down the river too far. What about us? What about all the times you said you had the answer? What about us? What about all the broken happy ever afters? Oh, what about us? What about all the plans that ended in disaster? Oh, what about love?
Too often we are told by Christian leaders, leaders like me, that we have all the answers. Too easily, the church tries to assure people in pain that there are only happy ever afters. Too frequently, we dismiss and try to forget the plans that led to disaster when we remember those two dancers, only able to share the choreography because they trusted one another and they have practiced together. We begin to realize that we are all children who just need to be loved. We are willing to try to be better each day, but bad theology leads us away from love instead of toward love. That is why I would agree we need to fast from bad theology this Lent. For example, teens are encouraged to wear purity rings, claiming they follow biblical models of purity before marriage. However, what are the real biblical models for marriage that require such purity? Biblical marriage is between one man and two sisters after he works 7 years to win each of them. That would be Jacob, Rachel, and Leah. Biblical marriage is between one man, his wives, and the woman he spied bathing nude, invited to his chambers after sending her husband to be killed on the front lines of a nasty war, only to rape her and subsequently marry her. That was King David. Biblical marriage is between one man, 700 wives, and 300 concubines. Biblical marriage is between one man in his mid-20s and one female child in her early teens. That would be Joseph and Mary. Bad theology is inconsistent between what it proclaims and what it ignores. Bad theology is believing in a God who condemns people to eternal conscious torment for not believing the correct theology, which is based on the interpretation of ancient writings that predate modern science. I would say that redemptive sufferings of ghastly theology seldom is suffering redemptive, and if it were, surely humanity would be redeemed by now. As Reverend Dr. Jackie Lewis writes, one of the greatest lies that's being told in God's name is that we are fundamentally wicked, born with evil lurking inextricably within. Instead, I would claim that we are fashioned from God's fierce and wondrous love, created for beauty and goodness. I wonder if we stopped preaching about an afterlife hell and started listening to the hell real people are living in the here and now. Maybe we would see a beautiful and necessary change in our faith communities. Such a change would need us to throw out belief in biblical literalism. It seems odd to me that some believe that the Bible, which is a collection of chosen ancient writings that have been edited several times and subjected to the political maneuverings of church councils, that it be considered the infallible, binding, and only truth from God to humankind. Too often, we try to ensure people believe the correct things, which are based on bad theology. Here is what David Hayward, the artist of this cartoon, writes about his thinking while drawing it. He writes, I see the same conflict whenever I read a church, a Christian organization, or a seminary statement of faith that is introduced with the phrase, this is what we believe, what I call Jesus and requirements. It is then I realize that Jesus is not enough for full standing acceptance or membership within that context. There are other agreements required. In such circumstances, Jesus is being redefined after the self-interest of the organization, and who we are really united around is our own self-image. Therefore, that setting has to live on the defensive. I suggest that the real Jesus does not need protection. As Dietrich Bonhoeffer wrote, being Christian is less about cautiously avoiding sin than about courageously and actively doing God's will. The gospel doesn't need a coalition devoted to keeping the wrong people out. It needs a family of sinners saved by grace, committed to tearing down the walls, throwing open the doors, and shouting, "Welcome! There's bread and wine. Come and eat with us and talk." This isn't a kingdom for the worthy, it's a kingdom for the hungry. The famous painting by Michelangelo on the Sistine Chapel ceiling is meant to depict the gift of life from God to humanity, humanity created in God's image. However, it has also led the church to typify God as the old guy in the sky, conferring good things only by divine whim. Nadia Bolz-Weber gets grittier, writing, "If you've been told that God is some kind of punishing, angry bastard with a killer surveillance system who is basically always disappointed with you for being a human being, then you have been lied to. The church has failed you, and I'm sorry." Let's affirm that Christianity is about helping others and controlling yourself. When it becomes about controlling others and helping yourself, it ain't Christianity. You see, if God didn't send Jesus to condemn the world, I doubt God sent you. There's lots of bad theology around prayer. Too many church communities reinforce the idea that prayer operates like a vending machine. You put your money in the offering plate so folks know you are a good Christian, contributing to the mission of the church. Then you pray, pressing the buttons to receive your requests. As Danish theologian and philosopher Soren Kierkegaard wrote, "The function of prayer is not to influence God, but rather to change the nature of the one who prays." Mother Teresa agrees, stating, "I used to believe that prayer changes things, but now I know that prayer changes us and we change things." Finally, there is a theological perspective that claims only through Jesus are we saved, and saved from most of the things that bad theology highlights, but mostly from our terrible, sinful selves. Often Christians will ask, "What would Jesus do?" instead of asking, "What did Jesus do?" Consider the story of Zacchaeus. Now, the popular conception of Zacchaeus is as a short man who climbed up a sycamore tree to be able to see Jesus. Instead, Zacchaeus was a chief tax collector and a very rich man. He earned that position by collaborating with the Roman oppressors as a traitor to his own people. His neighbors hated him. You see, as a Jew and a subjugated person, the only way to make good was to buy your way into higher status by being a tax collector. And however you were hated by those below you as a tax collector, you were hated by those below you for the taxes you collected and skimmed, as well as by the Roman authorities watching to make sure you didn't skim more than you should. As a result, it is fair to call Zacchaeus a social climber. Jesus turned the narrative upside down by inviting himself for supper, giving the gift of his presence to Zacchaeus, who didn't deserve it. That put Zacchaeus in Jesus' debt, promising to pay back all those whom he had defrauded fourfold. That would have bankrupted Zacchaeus. In effect, after encountering this daring Jesus, he resigned his position. That is how Jesus and how we save lives. Let me share a video with you that demonstrates how each of us can be part of saving others through fostering changes of heart while making deep connection.
Locked up. I'd find him a job in the private sector in one of our businesses, but he'd always gravitate back to vague criminality. So this one time he finished a 4-month stretch in a county jail, a probation violation. There he is sitting in front of me. And he says what gang members often say, "This time it'll be different." I go, So I pick up the phone. I call a friend of mine who runs a vending machine company. He says, "Tell Caesar he can start tomorrow." And 2 weeks later, there he is again, sitting in front of my desk. And I go, "Híjole, Madre Santa, here we go." But this time he pulls out of his pocket his very first paycheck, and he says, damn, gee, this paycheck makes me feel proper. I mean, my mom, she's proud of me, and my kids, they're not ashamed of me. And you know who I have to thank for this job. And I said, well, gosh, who? And he looked at me strangely and he said, well, God, of course. Oh, sure, no, that's right. That's right, that would be God, yeah. He said, you thought I was going to say you. I said, no, gosh, God's number one, yeah. He said, you are so lucky we're not living in them Genesis days. And I'm sorry, them Genesis days? He goes, yeah, because God would have had struck down your ass already by now. He said. But people always ask me about enemies working together, and it certainly is dicey, at least initially. And they always do the same thing. They think for a long ass time, and then they say, okay, I'll work with them, but I'm not going to talk to them. So I had this kid named Youngster. That was his gang name, a little tiny guy, and everybody called him Youngster. And I thought he was ready. So I bring him to Homeboy Silkscreen. So I'm introducing him to his coworkers, and I'm watching him as he shakes hands with every single one, even enemies. He looks them straight in the eye. And I think, wow, this is great. Until he gets to the last guy, a guy who seems to be wanting to avoid this encounter altogether, a kid everybody called Puppet. And when Puppet and Youngster are in each other's vicinity, they mumble something. They stare at their shoes. They don't shake hands. Well, I know they're enemies because I know what gangs they're from. But he just finished shaking hands with other enemies. This is a hatred that's really quite personal and deep, beyond which neither of them think they can really get past. Well, about 6 months later, Puppet goes to this store some distance from his home. And on the way home, he decides to take a shortcut, so he dodges into an alley. And because he's taken this detour, suddenly, unexpectedly, he's surrounded by 10 members of a rival gang, 10 against 1, and they beat him badly. He falls to the ground. Somebody finds his body and takes him to White Memorial Hospital, where he's declared effectively brain dead. But in the first 24 hours while he was lying there beaten in the hospital, I was alone in my office, 8:30 at night, and the phone rings, and it's Youngster, Puppet's coworker from the Silkscreen, and he says, hey, that's messed up about what happened to Puppet. I said, yeah, it is. And then with a certain kind of eagerness even, he said, is there anything I could do? Can I give him my blood? And we both fall silent under the weight of it, until finally he breaks the silence, choking back his tears, and he says with great deliberation, he was not my enemy. He was my friend. We worked together. Now, can I say that always happens at Homeboy Industries? Yes. Any exceptions? Not a single one. I think Mother Teresa diagnosed the world's ills correctly when she suggested that the problem in the world is that we've forgotten that we belong to each other. How do we stand against forgetting that? How can we obliterate once and for all this illusion that we are separate? For there's an idea that's taken root in the world, and it's at the root of all that's wrong with it, and the idea would be this: that there just might be lives out there that matter less than other lives. How do we collectively stand against that idea? And I suspect if kinship was our goal, we would no longer be promoting justice, we'd be celebrating it. You know, folks will say no justice, no peace, but the truth is no kinship, no justice. No kinship, no peace. No matter how singularly focused you may well be, we belong to each other, and there are no exceptions to that.
Notice that Father Gregory Boyle's message is all about our kinship with one another. Indeed, kin is at the center of the word kindness. We spread God's justice far and wide by daring to share our loving kindness with one another, just as Jesus did with Zacchaeus. As Pope Francis has written, God does not eliminate injustice from above by a show of power, but from above with a show of love. God does not burst on the scene with limitless power, but descends to the narrow confines of our lives. If Pope Francis is correct, how does God enter into our lives to help bring meaning and joy? Consider this imagined conversation with God, written by comedian and poet John Rodell, as a form of prayer when we feel so overwhelmed and helpless. Hey, God. Hello, my love. The world is completely out of control. I know, it's an adventure, isn't it, right? No, it's like being on a runaway train. I need to feel like I am in control of my life. You want to be in control? Yes. You are living on a spinning wet rock of a planet that resides next to a constantly exploding fireball in the midst of an ever-expanding universe that is filled with mysteries beyond your wildest imagination. Okay. And on this planet that you are hurtling through the great expanse, and you are coexisting with billions of other people who have free will and their own experiences that shape their perspectives and beliefs. Yeah. And while all this is going on, your soul is residing in a physical body that is such a miracle of delicate engineering that any given moment could produce its last heartbeat. Right. What is it about your existence that you think you have any control of? Come on, you know the answer to this. What can you control? How kind I am to people? Yep. And one other thing. What's that? How kind you are to yourself. Aside from that, most of everything else is a bit outside of your design. This is a bit terrifying. All great adventures are. Life is an adventure, a bit terrifying, but an adventure of discovery. Nevertheless, I pray that your week will be filled with discovering how to be kind to one another and to yourself. Until our next fireside chat on April 3rd, I wish you every kindness. Goodbye.